Hi, McGinn students. Mrs. Marchica here. I'm a third grade teacher at McGinn School, and I'm here to read to you for our Book Madness Challenge. So, I'm going to be reading the book called Picture Day Jitters. The teacher and the students in this class you may be familiar with if you've read some of the other books in the series, like First Day Jitters or Last Day Blues. The students and the teacher in this book are sometimes getting the jitters or kind of nervous about things. So in this book, Mrs. Hartwell and her students are a little bit nervous about picture day. Want to know a secret? Sometimes your teachers are a little nervous on picture day too, because we want to make sure everybody looks perfect. Let's find out what happens. Picture Day Jitters by Julie Dannenberg. At the end of the day on Tuesday, Mrs. Hartwell reminded her class that school pictures were the next day. "Don't forget to look your best," she said, as they headed out the door. The next morning, during circle time, Alexandra asked, "How do we look?" "You look picture perfect," Mrs. Hartwell said. The class smiled. "So do you," said Ariana. "Now, let's see if we can all stay that way." "Our class pictures aren't until the end of the day," Mrs. Hartwell told them. The class frowned. "You can do it," she assured them. But inside, she knew that this was going to be a very, very, very long day. I think Mrs. Hartwell has the jitters. Morning math class passed quickly. Mrs. Hartwell was surprised by how messy fractions could be. "That's okay. I'll fix it," she told them. And she did. Next was morning recess. The students got to go outside, but there was no chalk, no chasing, no digging, and definitely no fun. By the time morning recess was over, everyone still looked picture perfect, for the most part. Writing workshop went pretty well until the pencil sharpener broke. It was nice of Amir to clean it up, but it was messy. And now Amir was messy too. "That's okay," Mrs. Hartwell said. "I can fix it." And she did. Mrs. Hartwell decided that maybe it would be a good idea for everyone to eat lunch in the classroom. "And then we can play quiet games at our seats. Won't that be fun?" The class didn't look too sure. Mrs. Hartwell forgot that some of her students could get messy even when sitting quietly in their seats. "Don't worry, I can fix it," she said. Readers, I think we've heard Mrs. Hartwell say, "I can fix it," again and again in this text. Readers, when that happens, that's important. Pay attention to those things. I think we have a teacher here who really wants to fix things for her class. After lunch, the students had science. No experiments today. Instead, Mrs. Hartwell talked and talked and talked. It wasn't very exciting until Brandon fell out of his chair. Oh no, Brandon. Social studies and then reading. The afternoon crawled by. Everyone looked their best sitting quietly in their seats, but no one was smiling and having fun. "I don't think this day is ever going to end," Andy said, putting his head down on the desk. Finally, Mrs. Hartwell told everyone to put away their books and papers. The class cheered. "It is time to do our chores and straighten up the room," Mrs. Hartwell said. Let me take a look at some of their chores. And the students threw away trash. They fed the class pet, straightened up the books and art supplies, and Mrs. Hartwell kept a watchful eye, swooping in to fix any potential messes. When they were done, Mrs. Hartwell smiled. "Congratulations! You made it through the day, and you still look picture perfect." "Now it's my turn," she thought, finally getting a chance to look in the mirror. Oh my! Poor Mrs. Hartwell. She looks like some of the McGinn teachers at the end of the day. "Don't worry, I can fix it," Mrs. Hartwell reassured the class. But just then, they got called down to the gym for pictures. Ooh. The students lined up to take their individual pictures. As each one waited their turn, Mrs. Hartwell helped them look their best. The students were glad to be done. When it was time for the class picture, Mrs. Hartwell called everyone back together. "Oh no," she said, "the class wasn't picture perfect anymore." "Don't worry, I'll fix it," she reassured them. "But we don't have time," said the photographer. And she snapped the picture just as the bell rang. I wonder how their picture will turn out. Several weeks later, just before Mrs. Hartwell handed out the picture packets, she said, "I have to warn you, our class picture didn't turn out as I had planned." The students looked worried. Then Mrs. Hartwell laughed. "It turned out better!" The students looked confused. "When I saw our class picture," Mrs. Hartwell said, "I realized that there was nothing to fix because you're picture perfect, just the way you are." "We look like we do every day," the students said. "And that's how I like us best," said Mrs. Hartwell with a smile. Readers, Mrs. Hartwell was sure good at fixing things. I hope you enjoyed this book, readers, and I hope you enjoy the rest of March Madness here at McGinn.